with that, I want to introduce Terry Taylor to talk to us about theme park valuation. Terry, come on up. Boy, it's nice to have you here.
Mr. Governor.
Ex-governor. The governor's back there, but I'm the ex-governor. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for having me tonight. It's my honor to be here with ASA, and you know, we share common interests because we're valuing the world and providing value worldwide. IAAO is my passion. They've done a great deal for my own professional and the actual international association that it brings. The presentation you're seeing tonight is for presentation purposes only. When you think about value in theme park, I mean, not too many times you get the opportunity, but I tell you what, with the legislation and things that change today, I think I'd probably much rather be presenting on medicinal marijuana. You know, we recently passed that, right?
Let's have that as a.
I tell you what, I also do some work with agriculture. To give you a little bit of background, Mike's right. I teach internationally. I've been to Madrid, Spain with this presentation. I've taught in Texas and University of North Carolina and up and down the state of Florida. But my agricultural field appraiser visited our property and he came back, he told me that the farmer, I was in St. Lucie County as a real estate manager for the last 10 years. I've been back in Orange County for 2 years, but I've got a total of about 28 years experience in the appraisal industry. My agricultural appraiser came back to me one day with all this new legislation that's been passed and said the farmer received a visit from the Florida Drug Enforcement agent. The guy said, I'm here to inspect your property. And the farmer told him, well, you can go anywhere you want on my property, just don't go in that pasture over there. And unfortunately, the agent looked at him and he said, you see this badge? This badge says I can go anywhere I want, no questions asked, no answers given. You understand? The farmer said, sure, help yourself. So he went back to doing his chores. The farmer was working on the tractor, doing whatever he had to do. Before you know it, he heard the agent screaming at the top of his lungs. He ran over, the farmer ran to the pasture fence and saw this agent running, being chased by a Gertrude Brahma bull. And he knew, like any local farmer, if he didn't do something to help this situation, he did what any farmer would do. He just said, your badge. Show them your badge. So just take that in perspective sometimes when you're looking at information or you're visiting property. This is just going to be a quick general idea. We all follow USPAP and understand that you have to have some competencies. And I can tell you right now that everybody in this room is pretty much USPAP compliant when it comes to value in theme park. But I'm not going to teach you anything different than what you already know. We're going to talk about a cost approach, a sales comparison approach, and some basic income approach. And dinner's coming in about 15 minutes, so I'll be done and just run through some of this information real quick. The theme park valuation, everybody knows I work for Orange County Property Appraiser, and I'm the director of real estate. So how in the world can I be qualified to work with residential and value a theme park? Well, you know what? When you grow up in Orlando and you visit the theme park every graduation night, and then as a Florida surfer you rent Typhoon Lagoon when all the guests are leaving and you go surfing for about 100 waves at the cost of all your friends. Theme park valuation is nothing more than understanding the concept. Worldwide, you can see that Orlando, United States, China, Japan, there's theme parks everywhere. This is the top 25 amusement park. Orlando just happens to be the capital. Majority of the theme park operations out of the top 25 are right here in Orlando. That number 25 happens to be SeaWorld. How do you value Cinderella's castle? You know, it takes a lot of pixie dust. It's just a matter of understanding what you're looking at and recognizing that you need to know your product. You might need to know the details, the concept, and what's actually happening first of all, when you understand what the top 10 theme parks are in the United States, Disney World is top of the list. When you look at number 2, California, that's where it all started, at Disneyland. What do you think the next 2, 3, 4, and 5 are? It's more Disney World right here in Orlando. Epcot, Disney, Hollywood Studios, Universal Studios, Islands of Adventure. And then we go back across the country to California. Adventure in Anaheim, Hollywood, Universal, California. And unfortunately, believe it or not, SeaWorld is another top 10 in the United States. With this presentation, we demonstrate what the methods are, what the techniques are, a magnitude and importance, and more importantly, what the positive economic impact. As appraisers, it's important for us to understand how these types of properties affect not only the property itself, but the complementary properties that are related to these properties. We're talking about Magic Kingdom, Epcot, Animal Kingdom, Blizzard Beach. These are the water parks. Orlando is home to 7 major theme parks and about 4 major water parks. The origin originally started in 1500. Theme park was founded back in Denmark. In 1583, they had their first theme park, and it's still open today and operating in today's business. There's no admission to this park, but there's probably charges for some of the venues that you attend. It might cost you money to ride each ride, things like that. So just understanding what the parks have to offer. In Orlando alone, Walt Disney World makes up the majority of it. These are the parks: Magic Kingdom, Hollywood Studios, Animal Kingdom, and Epcot. You know, these parks all came in the 70s, the 80s, up into the 90s. And finally, we've got Universal Studio coming across the country, and Islands of Adventure, and SeaWorld. These are all the major theme parks that we need to understand what the methodology is to value these more than 19,000. In Disney World alone, there's 19,000 acres with over 1,200 buildings and almost 44 million square foot of buildings. We just break it down. I love Mike saying it's a cinch by the inch, right? If you need to know how to do something, just break it down to the smallest terms. This is some things that Mario might be interested in. In the theme park world of Walt Disney, there's over 114 tangible personal property accounts with more than 740 individual parcels. $12 billion in value. It's the largest taxpayer in Orange County, and it basically makes up over half of all the 67 counties in the state. The property tax expense back in 2016 was about $270 million. We just break it down simply. You realize these things don't sell, right? How often do you see these properties traded? The only reliable source to establish some type of indication of value is on a cost approach. And what better source to maybe use Marshall and Swift? Wouldn't you say, Lee?
No. For real property, yes, not for personal.
That's right.
But
Marshall and
they're their own taxing jurisdiction.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. Reedy Creek is their own taxing jurisdiction. So we'll elaborate and identify how we identify different market segments in something called a cost market approach. We'll compare a cost market approach with what Marshall and Swift has to indicate. And finally, it's important for all of our appraisers to compile complex construction structures. You need to understand what you're looking at. In reality, these things are nothing more than offices, warehouses, and something called amusement housing rides. And there's different things that are specifically unique out of each one of them. Our appraisers, and you as an appraiser, if you're looking at some of these properties, you need to understand the uniqueness and whether or not the unit of comparison on a square foot, a cubic foot, and then more importantly, know what your building types are, what the classification is. Not to mention the extra features. If you think about Epcot, at one point Epcot was just a sphere. You have to go to calculus to understand the cubic square foot or the cubic square foot of a sphere.
Cubic foot. No, you're mixing two together. It's cubic foot.
Thank
or
you,
square.
Phil. So, you know I'm just a residential appraisal and this is for presentation purposes only, right?
So is he?
But look at the extra features over here in Typhoon Lagoon. Look at those things. Could you imagine identifying how many square foot of swimming pool or what the slide?
How many linear feet of slide?
Yeah, that's a good point. What about the uniqueness of Epcot? You got round, you got unique irregular shaped buildings, you got diamond shaped buildings. These things all come with some challenges. And any appraisal assignment is required to identify the scope and first of all, identify the definition, what's the problem. How are we going to identify these buildings? We just need to know whether the building is a tourist attraction, a soundstage, is it a Shamu stadium, a museum, ride housing. There's just some DOR stats. Back in 2015, when you go to Epcot, you need to understand what kind of restaurants and worlds you're actually appraising. At the bottom of this lake, each one of those is Japan, China, Denmark, Sweden. The cost approach is nothing more than with relying on an example of a cost market Marshall and Swift. The real property appraisers in this room are all familiar with Marshall and Swift valuation services.
Yep.
And actually applying these techniques. If I take it a step further, realize this particular example has 5 buildings, but there's a whole bunch of different sections in this building. There's restaurants, there's offices, it's a canopy, and we just take line item by line item, start with the square foot, and think about any necessary perimeter ratio. Item number 6, perimeter, to try to identify a perimeter adjustment. I don't need to teach the Marshall and Swift valuation process, but just to recognize if you break it down to the simplest forms, you can identify the building. And look at the floor area perimeter multiplier. That's just identified off of line 5 and 6, and you can also look at a height adjustment. These type of things are no different. The only thing that might be unique about this is looking at the entrepreneur incentive, 15%. If Reedy Creek is the only taxing jurisdiction and they have their own building inspectors and they have their own expertise, don't you think there's some entrepreneur profit or entrepreneur benefit? And that's how you can account for it. The depreciation taken strictly off a depreciation schedule. I was in Madrid, Spain talking about this topic, and one of the questions in the audience came from a professor in England. He said, well, how do you depreciate something that's like the Magic Kingdom? You know they come in, all those little elves and fairies, and they clean that place up, and there's not a piece of depreciation on that building? Yes, Phil.
Lee, you could correct me on this, but I understand that Miami-Dade County, they treat it as a 100-year life. And how do you do it for like either theme parks? You look at each building separately, and you have a different age.
Yeah, you know what? We just identify by building type and refer to Marshall and Swift depreciation schedule.
You refer to them.
Okay, we've got 2 things happening here. We have a cost market approach that's derived from the market information, and we have a Marshall and Swift that we're actually, I'm going to break it down a little closer and just show you that we've identified replacement cost new minus depreciation on each of these sections. When you look at the total replacement cost and subtract the depreciation, you can come up with some type of indicated value. This is an example of building number 4. So you have to compile 4 records. And then with the cost approach, what do? You estimate the land value. In order to identify the land value, what's the appropriate method for identifying land value? Sales comparison. You can go to sales comparison in the tourist district. I don't care if it's International Drive, 192, and come up with enough sales to recognize what that parking lot and that racetrack is worth on the simplest form, just sales comparison. And then summarize all 5 of these buildings. Summarize all 5 buildings for replacement cost new, add up all the depreciation, and this is just another technique to verify what's happening in the marketplace based on a third unbiased party that's establishing some cost figures. There's your land comparison. 150 acres valued at $300,000. How many times do you see acreage at $300,000 an acre? There's sales in the tourist industry that supports that indication of value. Depreciated building value plus the depreciated swimming pools, the paving, the sidewalk, the concrete, the patios, $45 million worth of land. Look at the other lump sum adjustments. Impact fees. You know, when you're appraising properties on a comparative approach, you're going to look at the typical market condition, and if somebody's building a property in your county or your city, you need to consider the impact fees that are going to be taking place. When you add all these components, depreciated building value plus extra features, plus these things called impact fees, indicated value just sums up on 5 buildings at $54 million. This is just an example for presentation purposes only.
What kind of life is Marshall assigning to theme parks?
Well, you've looked at Marshall and Swift 100 times, and
Not
probably,
lately.
yeah,
But-
you know, most of those straight line depreciation or step down depreciation, usually somewhere from 60 to 75 years. So this is nothing more than, yeah, thank you. There's nothing more than just identifying something to calibrate and measure against the market. And if
What's
these,
the effective age?
well, right now I identify these things at 8% depreciation, so it's currently in this system at 92%. But we know Disney was built in the 70s,
Right.
and they update it every night. So,
Okay.
theme park valuation can be as simple as identify how many ticket sales. But remember, for the business valuation discipline, ticket sales is a business value, right? What about parking fees, miscellaneous income maybe? But if you do away with that, you just come strictly back into the income approach, because not only are there theme parks, there's complementary properties like hotels, restaurants that are more appropriately identified on an income approach. And I don't have to explain what resort rates are, the average daily rate, and God forbid we talk about ancillary income in this presentation. Potential gross income minus any vacancies, market expenses, capitalize the net income. We can come up with some kind of indication of value. Everybody's familiar with the Yacht and Beach Club, right?
Yeah.
It's a nice place.
Did you? Are they suing you?
We collect income data, right?
We tried it.
Yeah. If we don't collect income data from the property owners, we can collect market index or market data from the other 300 hotels. So pretty soon the typical rent, expenses, vacancy becomes apparent. We're just using a income and expense survey that identifies income for office buildings, warehouse, retail, income. How about the hotels, hotel, motel? These are presented to 20,000 property owners and as much as 30,000 property owners. Based on the type of property, we can identify what the typical market information is.
Do you do a survey that you send out to the property owners that they respond to that helps
Yeah.
you develop this?
That's exactly what it is.
That's reported to the state to find out all the
Yeah,
income and the rate from
and-
the state.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's confidential information, isn't it, Lee? So we need to respect the confidentiality based on the use map, but it's also, you can ask anybody else, these forms aren't required by law to respond to. Yes, Phil?
Okay, wouldn't the major change basically be in the real estate portion? Because since the beginning of, let's say, Disney World or Epcot or any of those, you already got down the size of the building, you know, and various components of that aspect of it. And so you work your depreciation, and I assume they're gonna have some type of agent representing them on their side. Would that be correct?
Sure.
And so therefore, but all the buildings are known, there's not gonna be a mistake in the size or things like that. So basically, it's gonna be, the major change will be in, let's say, the land value, more so than the building value.
Sure.
And I agree with you that they have to keep it updated all the time, they just can't let it deteriorate
Sure.
like that, because of the traffic they have.
Yeah.
So, so your main, would you say that your main component is in the land?
The main component is like any other appraisal: land, building, and any extra feature out parcels. So
The main component in terms of changing in value would be in the land.
that's a good possibility. But we're concentrating. You'll see as we go through the presentation that sometimes cost market changes, and if you notice right now, in most of Florida, there's a shortage of construction labor and shortage of material because of the boom. And what happens when there's a shortage? The cost of improvements go up. So all the economic principles, especially supply and demand, are significantly important with a lot of the details that go on. Market value. In 2012, Disney was valued with all those properties at $7.1 million.
Wow.
Billion.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
yeah, everybody got
With a
that,
B.
right? But the tax value was $175 million in taxes. They're the #1 taxpayer in
Higher
Florida.
than FP&L?
Probably not. 2015, we saw a significant increase, about $11.1 billion. The property taxes went to $235 million. These are just reacting to fair market value based on specific market information and some of the techniques. When you look at the historical impact, I'm going to show you how this stuff stabilizes. 2012, we saw a 5% increase to 13, 8% increase into 14, and we had to make some significant decisions up into 2015, and there was a significant economic impact because guess what? If everybody pays their fair share, the tax rates remain lower. It's only fair to the working class and to the people that are paying the property taxes as a whole. But over time it stabilizes once you identify fair market value based on market information balanced against a third unbiased Marshall and Swift. You can recognize that things stabilize. Here it was for 3 years, stable, significant increase. It went up 1 year, but things are stabilized again. 5%. We're looking at less than 5% over the last couple of years. This in 2016 compares on the right hand side. It's called something like the cost approach. Marshall Swift valuation. Look at the Magic Kingdom, $500 million. But the CAMA system, based on market information, trying to identify mass appraisal techniques, was only $437 million. So all you're doing is comparing a Marshall and Swift cost estimate with a mass appraisal modeling concept. And all the way down, you can pretty much realize that the CAMA system compared to a third unbiased cost system is relatively 70 to 80% of what the indication are. The Marshall and Swift is just a supportive approach from a third unbiased party to justify and identify market indicators, like Phil says, in land valuation, inflationary information on buildings.
What's the CAMA? What does that mean?
It's a Lee. Would you like to explain that CAMA system? Computer-aided mass appraisal system.
Mass appraisal.
In the standard 6 of USPAC, standard says that the mass appraisal for developing, reporting, and establishing an income on mass appraisal properties, a universe of properties. All the single-family residents in your subdivision are treated on a CAMA, computer-aided mass appraisal system. It's an automated valuation system. Orange County happens to have the longest historical CAMA system that was developed by the grandfather of CAMA, Jimmy Howes. In the 1970s, they put the Howes-O-Matic, and he drove it into Fort Lauderdale to a national conference to demonstrate it. in this day and age, every county in the country, every city, every taxing authority uses a computer-aided mass appraisal system because Orange County is managing 400,000 properties. Miami-Dade is managing 1 million properties. Palm Beach County is managing 675,000 properties. So we need some modeling concepts that allows us to value 400,000 residential properties equitably, fairly, and uniformly. And we do the same thing with unique property types as well. With that said, the top theme parks worldwide. What do you think the worldwide top #1 theme park? These are based on visitations or populations, ticket sales. Magic Kingdom Orlando is #1. What do you guess the second top?
Magic Kingdom, California.
How about #2 is Disneyland, but Japan is right up there with population visits. These are countries that are getting on board with the theme park valuation. We're 5 minutes over. I'm going to wrap this up real quick. Epcot, Orlando, Disney. Orlando takes 7 of the worldwide top visited sites are all made up in Orlando. Unfortunately, there was some lack of accommodations in the SeaWorld theme park. If you can't house the visitors, it has an effect on value. So though SeaWorld is located in International Drive, there's no on-site hotels and living accommodations for the visitor. That's why it's number 25 in the world. It's in the top 10 in the country, but there's other countries across the world. In conclusion, these theme parks drive the economy. There's over 235 million theme park visitors in the country, and the mean average wage salary is $30,750. The job opportunities are there. There's nearly 200,000 employed nationwide. And this is the reason why there's responsible assessment, equitable assessment. We have to be as uniform and measurable as possible. Some of the additional resources, you can always go to the Rick Scenes Orange County OCPA FL website. I can tell you it's a leader in the country. We're using state-of-the-art technology, and that's a great resource. The Theme Entertainment Association is where all the stats come from. You can go to that website. International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions. And there's a local builder located in Orlando that builds all these unique type of teddy bears and gingerbread and, you know, unusual type of construction. Not necessarily always buildings, but the unique type of design and creative nature. Nasal.com, and they're also located in Europe as well. ASA, IAAO, great partners in value worldwide. IAAO recognizes reciprocity with ASA, and ASA recognizes IAAO reciprocity. Excellent partners, and if there's any question, I'll be able to answer it, but I think your dinner is coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You take your order in?
I sure did. Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
They handle their own.
They have their own legal team.
What's the score?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate you allowing us to present this, and I've been here with this ASA South Chapter on a number of occasions. Last time I spoke was on multifamily appraisal. I presented at your international conference, and I look forward to continue to participate in the future. If you have any questions through the evening, feel free to catch me. I'll be glad to answer any of your questions.
Hey, Terry, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Have you gone internationally and done the presentation?
I did. Rick Singh and I presented the theme park valuation presentation in Madrid, Spain at the 11th Annual IAAO, International Association of Assessing Officers Research Symposium. As a result, Rick Singh was honored and recognized as the International Member of the Year with IAAO in Minnesota at the International Conference for his work internationally.
Fantastic. It's international, so how many countries are part of the
IAAO, I don't have the exact number, but I want to say it's maybe 30 countries. I currently sit on the Professional Development Committee and have worked to identify a certificate of excellence in assessment administration. I chaired the International Task Force, and I've worked in Melbourne with committee members from Melbourne, Australia to London, England, and we have connections in Iceland, Czechoslovakia, Spain, Portugal, and a good friend of mine is in Liberia, Africa, the only IAAO member in the African nation.
All
Thank
right,
you very
Terry.